Hello there, it's Cassie. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Last week I had a haul video with my favorite things, items, and it showed the Festive Flamingos kit, and y'all seem pretty interested in that. So I'm going to make 5 cards for you today using the Festive Flamingos kit. And the kit's not available anymore, but all the items still are. So I will have all those items listed down below if it's something that you're interested in. But I'm going to go ahead and get started here. I have the little flamingos. I'm going to go ahead and stamp all 4 of those, and I have some Express It cardstock. That's my favorite cardstock for Copic coloring, and that's just personal preference. And I've got that lined up in my Mini Misty. And I have these trimmed down. I took one sheet of 8.5 by 11 cardstock and I trimmed it down into 4 panels, and I'm going to stamp these flamingos out 4 times. You're not going to see me stamp all 4 times, but I am going to do that. I'm using my Memento Tuxedo Black ink, and I will stamp these a couple times each onto that just to make sure that I have a good crisp image, and then I'll take that out and I'll do that 3 more times. And then I'm going to color these up with some Copic markers. So I'm using R02, and I'm going to do the R22 for my darker shade. They're flamingos, and so since they're not really pink in real life, but these are cartoon flamingos, so you could color them however you wanted, I decided to do more of a coral color, so that's why I'm using my R's. I have, like I said, the R02 and the R22, and I'm going to end up coloring all of my flamingos basically the same, at least with the same color palette. So you won't see me color all 4 of my flamingo panels, but I will be coloring them all basically the same. I'll switch up their scarves, and that's about it. So I'm going through just adding my shading where I wanted, and then I'm blending that out with my R02 just to make sure that it's not too harsh of a line. And these are such small, well, not small, but they're, you know, not super detailed, so you wouldn't have to go too crazy with colors. I ended up picking only about 2 colors per color family there. And so I had my YG01, and I'm going over that with my darker tone, which is the YG03. And for my blues, I'm using B21 and B45. And it's super simple coloring. I don't even think it actually makes any sense where I put my shading, but it works. And for my BVs, I'm using BV02 and BV04. And for their beaks, I will use C5 and C7, and then I will blend that out with C3, and I'll also use the C3 just on some shadowing for their ice skates as well. So very simple. And now I'm going to show you some die cutting. So I lined up all my dies on that panel, and I'm going to run this through my Big Shot. I want to show you that these are still small enough that you could do it this way, or if you have the Sizzix Sidekick, you could cut those out and you could run those through your Sizzix Sidekick, because these fit in there very nicely as well. I adore my Sizzix Sidekick, and I don't know if I actually saved any time by doing it this way. I think it's 6 in one, half a dozen in the other, honestly, because you still have to line your die up each time. So it really, you know, I don't know if it's saving any time. May actually be giving me more time or taking more time away, but since my Sidekick doesn't leave my desk, and it is sometimes a pain to get my Big Shot out with the lack of space that I have, sometimes it's just easier for me. Otherwise, I'm die cutting on my lap. So I will run all those through the rest of the images through my Sizzix Sidekick. And now we're going to go ahead and get started on the first card. So for the first card, I pulled out some of that plaid paper that came in the kit, and I cut that to be the exact same size as a card front would be. And for my sentiment, it was too long. So I have that lined up on an ink block, or a stamp block. And then as you saw, I used a Post-it to cover up what I didn't want inked up. And in between, when you're done, you have to make sure that your stamp is super clean. Otherwise, you will end up getting some back stamping. So I'll clean that off and make sure that that's good and dry as well with a microfiber cloth. And then I'll move on to the last part of the sentiment. I wanted to cut these apart, but I thought that the words on the sentiment themselves were too close together for me to actually just snip them apart. I mean, I suppose it could be done, but not for the look that I was going for. So then I'll use my Fiskars wire trimmer, and I'll trim those down to the size that I would like. That's the nice thing about the wire trimmers. You can see where you're cutting before you actually start cutting. So that's all I'm doing there, is just kind of trimming that down. And I didn't do it perfectly. It's mostly eyeballed, which is the story of my life. But it's a handmade card, so you're going to get some variation sometimes, and I don't mind. So that's what I did for my sentiment, and then I'll set that on there, and I will start lining up how I want my flamingos in a little bit here. So I've backed those with some foam tape, and I'm using my T-ruler because we all know I can't eyeball something to make it straight. And so I'm just adding that down, taking off the backing paper, and then just trying to center it as best I can. That I did eyeball, obviously. And then that's good enough. So I'll start adhering the flamingos just using some tacky glue. And they're all over the place, kind of willy-nilly. I didn't want to use, obviously, all the flamingos that I cut and colored. I did, 16? So I was fairly sparing because I want to use all of these flamingos to make the 5 cards that I made today. It ends up making, in the end, you'll see a very pretty set of Christmas cards. And I'm just continuing. And it's okay that there is some hanging off the edge. I will trim that off here in a little bit. But for now, and here's where I originally started. I had 4 of the flamingos picked out, and I started cutting off their pieces, and I was trying to imagine where I could put them because I didn't want to waste the pieces. And I did put this one down with some glue, but I end up changing my mind with that one later, and you'll see here in a minute. I peel that off, and it does tear the paper, but with the flamingo that I decided to use ends up covering up that tear, so it's not a big deal. And I'll just snip off the rest of him as well. And I'm using my Cutter Bee precision scissors for that. Those are awesome. And then I'll use that same glue because it'll give me some wiggle room. I'll use that same glue to tack that down to my card base, which is some of the cardstock that came in that Festive Flamingos kit. The kits are nice because if you do end up getting them, you get, a discount. You can always buy the items individually, but this works out nicely too. And then I'm just going to take a scrap of that same pattern paper and stick it on the inside just for a little bit of cohesion. And I'll snip off that excess. And then that'll finish off card number 1. They're so cute. So for card number 2, I'm going to do a bit of a scene. I'm using several things from My Favorite Things. Several of the cardstocks as well that came in the kit. I have the Stitched Basic Edges die there. I'm lining that up on the bottom of some of that blue cardstock. And I trimmed all of that cardstock just in half because I knew I would make bases out of most of them. And my bases are top folding A2 size cards when I'm done scoring them. And then I'm going to take those trees. Those trees are called the winter trees. And I didn't ever cut those apart. And they work out beautifully to go right through my Sizzix Sidekick. And I'm going to take some of those trees and put those onto some Post-it tape just to kind of keep them in place. And I end up getting ink all over the place. And so it doesn't end up, allowing those trees to stick that great. But I'm using some evergreen bough with my mini ink blending tool just to add a little bit of color variation to those trees, because I'm going to end up stacking a few of those onto those trees that have the stump. And so I will line all those up on there and just kind of give each of those a little bit of color. It's not super noticeable there, but you will see a difference when I line them up. And I'll just take some of that same craft tacky glue and put those all over those trees that have the stumps. And then I'll line up the other trees on top. So it gives a little bit of dimension. You wouldn't necessarily have to do this, but I liked it. I ended up not needing a bunch of trees anyway. I used all the trees that I cut out, so it would have been unnecessary for me to cut out a bunch more or use all of those. And I screwed up here. So I didn't show you me actually putting the sentiment onto my panel because I end up screwing it up. So I'm using some golden titanium white acrylic paint. It's fluid acrylic, and I did add a little bit of water to that. And I'm just going to use a stamp block and a paintbrush, and I'm going to splatter that all over. And if I had stopped here, that would have been good. But I didn't stop here. I just kept going. And I should have covered up that Happy Christmas, but I didn't. So as you can see, I have a big old splotch right there in the middle. And instead of trying to take it off, which isn't going to work, I just dry it and I'll cover that up with a different sentiment strip. I decided to use some black this time, and I'm stamping that using some Versamark ink and covering that with some white embossing powder. And then I will heat set that with my heat gun just till it's smooth and melted. And when I'm done and that's dried off, I will put that inside of my paper cutter and I will trim that sentiment down. And I ended up cutting a bit of a slant on that one side. So to adhere everything to my card, I'm using a tape runner right now just to put down the snowbank. And I'll use some tacky glue on my trees. And I want those to look like they're coming off the page and following that horizon line of the snow or ice or whatever you want to call it. I guess it would have to be ice since these flamingos that I've chosen do have some ice skates on. And I'm just going to put that all over the back on both sides using 3 trees per side. And I'll move on to the other side. And I can just lift up that ice just a little bit to adhere my trees. So that way they look like they're definitely in the distance. And then when I am done with that, I'll end up trimming down those trees. I did end up getting a little bit of water on the back of my card, so I wiped up the water a little bit better. Thankfully it dries. So all those are trimmed off, and now I'll start adhering the rest of the bits. And once again, I try to eyeball it, and you'd think I'd learn. It's because I'm lazy. So it didn't work, so I try it again. Think of the time I would save if I just pull out the T-ruler the first time. Thankfully, nothing was completely adhered yet, so that worked out okay. And then I'll cover the rest of the images using some foam tape, which those are kind of some small images, so that's a bit of a bear if you want to use foam tape on those, their little feet and things. And I didn't push that down yet. Be proud of me, because I don't want to have to peel it up later. So I'm just trying to make sure that they're lined up where I want them, and then I will push those down, and then that will finish off this card. I love the scene. I thought that was so pretty. That blue cardstock is amazing. Love it. On to card number 3. This is going to be a fairly simple shaker card. I'm using the Happy Christmas stamp that came with my kit. Well, it didn't come with my kit. I ended up spending $60 and I got that die for free. So I thought this would be a wonderful opportunity to give it a shot. And ta-da, pulling out my T-ruler. And I'm going to tape that down in place, making sure that it's fairly straight. And then I'll run that through my Big Shot machine. And that's what I end up getting. I saved all the pieces though. So I'm using some I'm going to put some acetate down. And in order to do that, I'm using just that same tacky glue that I've been using, just in very thin amounts. So you don't want that seeping around, because I plan to put some sequins behind that. And my card base is some of the dark pink cardstock that came in the kit. And I am scoring that once again at 5.5 inches to make a top folding A2 size card. Well, this will be side folding. To make my shaker, I am using my Scotch foam tape, and I have that doubled up because I want to make sure that the sequins can move around fairly freely. And I'm butting this up really tightly so that it's all together so nothing can come out. And I had this, in my opinion, brilliant idea to put the letters back in that had the little centers. And I wanted to make sure I had all the right centers, but I didn't. I grabbed one for the P and tried to shove it in the R, and it didn't work. So then I had to move it, and you only have so much time before your glue dries, so I just basically stuck it down where the P was and didn't get a chance to line the P into it. I will straighten that out a little bit better so it doesn't look so wonky. But I finally found the R, the center of the R, and decided that it just wasn't worth the pain to try and put all the letters back in. At least not the way I was doing it. I'm sure there's a much better way. And all I'm using is some It's the Ranger Multi-Medium Matte adhesive. That works out really well, and it dries clear, which is, or at least matte, so it doesn't make, it's not glossy underneath, and it holds really well. So that's what I've been using this whole time, along with my Simon Says Stamp Craft Tacky glue. And then the last little bit is that A. And then it'll be in there, and we'll be ready to start working the sequins. And the sequins I'm using are from Pretty Pink Posh. These are Orchid in 6mm and in 4mm. I want to make sure that was good and full. And you won't be able to differentiate them too much from the background since the cardstock I'm using is such a dark pink. And word to the wise, it's actually better, especially if you're using small bits, to peel off your backing paper first, because sometimes your backing paper catches and it'll cause your paper to bump, and then it can cause the sequins to get wonky or jump out or whatever it is you're using to stick to the adhesive, and you don't want it to do that. Just making sure that's good and on there. And you can sort of see those sequins back there, and it of course makes the really cool sequin sound. And I've grabbed one of the Flamingos, and I'll just glue him down using that same Ranger Multi-Medium Matte. And when I have him where I want him, this is a very simple card. I'm going to end up taking a C3 Copic. And I realize that's kind of dark, so I'll grab my colorless blender, and then I'll grab the C1 marker and just blend that out a little bit more, so it doesn't look like he's just floating. And that'll end up finishing off this card. I love the simplicity of that one with all that white space. That's fun. For card number 4, I have some more of that patterned paper. I'm going to trim that down to fit, just to be a little bit smaller than my card base is going to be. So it'll basically be a 4" by 5 1/4 panel. And then I'm going to line up the Stitch Triple Peekaboo window and run that through my Big Shot. That won't fit through my Sidekick. So I'll run that through my Big Shot, and I'll save those pieces because you could use those on another card. And I'll stick that inside my Mini Misty so that I can stamp my sentiment on there. This isn't exactly the sentiment I wanted to use, but all the others were a little too big, so Happy Christmas it is again. And then once again with my card base, scoring at 5½ inches. And when you have all your images stamped and colored out, it makes assembling these cards so quick and easy. I've put foam tape all over the back of that panel. And then I'm going to adhere that down to my card base. And then I'll start taking the little flamingos, and I'm going to end up trimming them down so that they fit inside those pockets pretty well. I love these peekaboo. They're so cute. And then it gives a different look for your cards. And you could trim apart your peekaboo and you could put them in different places, but I really like the way that they are assembled, so I haven't trimmed them apart yet. And when I have my flamingos about how I want them, I'll start adhering them down using the Ranger Multi-Medium Matte adhesive. Making sure not to cover my Happy Christmas. And then for a final bit of embellishment, I'm going to use some Nuvo Violet Galaxy Crystal Drops. And you can see I made a little bit of a boo-boo there. I didn't get a clean drop. So I'm going to use my X-Acto knife and scrape that away the best that I can. It doesn't take it away fully, but it does make it better. And then I notice another one that obviously I was in a hurry when I did this card. So once I've got that done, I'll tap those down to make them look a little bit more like enamel dots, and that will finish off card number 4. Card number 5 is another fairly easy card, especially like I said before, if you have all of your flamingos stamped out or all your images stamped and colored. I'm just getting a card base ready to go, and I'm going to use the My Favorite Things Snow Flurry stencil. I'm using some micropore tape to hold that down, just to give it like a hinge. And if I had been thinking, I would have taped down my card base, but I wasn't. I have grabbed some white pigment ink along with my mini ink blending tool and a new sponge. And I am going to sponge on some of that white ink through the stencil. And it's pretty subtle because the background isn't super dark anyway. The card base isn't super dark. So as you can see, it's there, but it's subtle, and I like that. And then at that point I had to stop because I hadn't lined up my paper correctly. I'm just using a scrap of some of that pattern paper that I had from before, and I cut a flag banner in it. So in order to do that, I snip into the middle and then let the ends reach that. And then for my sentiment, and I can't even stamp straight. I should have stuck this inside my mini Misty as well. So then I have to flip my paper, and I don't think I stamped it straight the second time either, but that's okay. Adds to the handmade touch. And then I'll trim that down and do flag banners on that one as well. And then I will start adhering those using a tape runner. And I'll line that up on my glass mat using the grid line. And then when that's adhered, I will flip that over and trim off the excess. To adhere my flamingo, I'm just going to use the same Ranger multimedia mat that I have been using. I thought about popping him up, but his little legs would have been a bit of an issue with the foam tape, so he's just going down flat. And for a final bit of embellishment on this card, I am going to use some marshmallow sequins from Pretty Pink Posh in 4mm and 6mm, and I'm using my crystal katana along with my Ranger multimedia mat to get those adhered. And when I'm done with that, that is going to finish off card number 5. I like the way they all turned out personally, and so yeah, super happy about that. So let's go ahead and take a look at the 5 cards. I would love to hear which one is your favorite. If you liked this video, go ahead and hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. And as always, I appreciate you stopping by. Have a great day.